This video is super late because I didn't want to step in front of the camera. I'm trying to be more consistent about doing this. It's a pretty big fear, so I guess it's time to face some fears. In the last video I did the unboxing for the Leica SL. I got some pretty good questions and I got some pretty interesting comments, and it is a little bit of a sleeper camera for this year. Since the SL2 came out, the price has gone down drastically. So recently I took a trip up to Phoenicia, New York, which is a town just a little further north past Woodstock. Woodstock is more famous, more people probably know it. The food's good. There's hiking, there's a river running through it. It seems like there's a river running through every little town in upstate New York. Getting out of the city for a couple of days seemed worth the risk, and in hindsight it really was very minimal risk. It was actually pretty easy to not interact with anybody given what's going on these days. I don't blame people for not traveling. International travel is out of the question. This little trip also seemed like the perfect excuse for me to test out vintage M42 mount lenses and get some photography in. It was a relaxed pace, you know, there was much else going on. It didn't rain most of the time, so I didn't want to risk the camera too much. But weather sealing is really only as good, I guess, as your lens. None of these lenses are weather sealed. None of them have gaskets. I didn't have too many opportunities. A lot of it was just stop the car, 5 minutes here, stop the car, 5 minutes there. But it was okay. So you can either enjoy your trip or you can make it about accomplishing something with photography. I didn't want to think about any of that, and I really didn't. Phoenicia's a charming town. There's a mountain range in the background of everything you look at. You're walking over to a deli to pick up lunch, and there's like this beautiful mountain range in the back. You go to a gas station, and there's like, there they are, the mountains, the trees, and they're like a million different colors. And it was visually, it was great. Not interacting with people on a trip in a small town, it just seems really strange. Everything seemed just a little bit empty. There were a lot of tourists in Woodstock, New York. Not a lot by, I guess, their normal numbers, but there were still enough people where it was kind of like, yeah, I don't think we're gonna spend too much time outside. So I decided to take just a minimal kit, as minimal as this monstrous camera can be. It's a big camera. I don't know how big my hands are in comparison to most people, but I know it looks kind of small here, but once you get a lens on it and you start like moving it around and shooting it, it's a little beastly. It is definitely the biggest camera that I've ever owned that's not an actual SLR, but the size works in its favor, and I went over this in the unboxing video. You can check that out if you haven't seen it. Very simple, very intuitive controls. There's a short press and a long press. It's very well thought out. I know a lot of people talk about just how good this EVF is. I think that's a little overblown. It's a good EVF. It still feels like it's, by modern standards, it feels like it's still, you can tell the camera came out a couple of years ago. You got Cinema 4K, 100 megabits. The colors in camera for video are actually really good. If you bump down the saturation, if you bump down the contrast, you get a really film-like look. And I know people kind of define that in different ways, but it really feels like you're getting an image that does not look like many other digital cameras. It doesn't look like Fuji, but this looks better in many ways. There's more noise, but yeah, this is, for video, this is very capable if you don't mind the crop factor and the fact that you don't have a mic input, a standard mic input. You need a special adapter from Leica. They're always doing this weird stuff with their cameras, I guess. So the lenses I decided to take up with me, I figured I'm going to take 2 lenses, 55 1.8 SMC Takumar. This is not the actual radioactive lens, but it is as close as you can get to that for much less. It's a beautiful lens, really, really good for short telephoto. You can do portraits with it, great for video. The focus throw on the M42 lenses I just love because it's not super long, but it is very well dampened, is the word I'm going to use. They do look like they kind of belong together, even though this looks a little bit more futuristic in this thing, but the way they're there's so much metal on them, it's hard to get past the quality and the fact that they come together really well. This is the 28mm SMC Takumar 28 f3.5. It doesn't let in a lot of light. That 3.5 aperture did give me some issues. It's good for shooting, inside interiors and stuff. But aside from that, the JPEGs out of this camera are also very good. For a JPEG shooter, it'll work out fine. The noise above ISO 800, I would say it's okay. For video, my biggest gripe with this camera when it comes to video is the L-log. I don't know how it is in the SL2, but the L-log in this camera is straight trash. It's pretty much, you can't grade it. There's all sorts of ugly noise. It's muddy. The blacks are noisy. The highlights are bad. Even at ISO 100, you can shoot it at ISO 50, and you better get your exposure right if you're shooting a log on this camera. The crop factor becomes an issue, especially these days. Every single camera coming out, even full frame ones, seem to not have a crop factor, and they all have in-body image stabilization and quick switching between video and independent settings for video and photo make your life a lot easier. And all the L-mount cameras for Panasonic just seem to outperform it technically. And I think just looking at it objectively, they are better objectively, but again, I said it in my previous video, this feels like an M240 with autofocus. If you can get L-mount glass, aside from the Sigma option, are super, super expensive right now. Although the caveat here is the Leica R lenses, and they work beautifully with this camera. As far as the raw files go, combined with the M42 lenses, they seem to, this is probably me trying to figure out an issue that this setup might give you, but I feel like it's just across the board when you're using older lenses. I might just be imagining this, but it seems like there's a tiny bit more noise. I don't even know if that's possible since that's a sensor issue. The files in post with the native lens obviously are easier to use because Lightroom has lens profiles and everything. So in terms of whether this issue is real or imagined, yeah, L-mount lenses are going to work a lot better with this camera, but M42 lenses, Leica R lenses, are just magical. If you've got M42 lenses and you're looking at a full frame setup that does pretty good video, and if you don't mind the crop factor and you don't need to shoot log, this is just a really, really good option. You can get them for about $2,200 to $2,300 used. I scored mine for 2,000 even, I think. And like I said, it just freshly cleaned. And it was a really good seller. I lucked out.